what was going on in Israel at the beginning of this week, it is, and we've had a couple of interviews on this. I'm curious as to your thoughts, because it really is just fascinating to see what's been going on there. Fascinating both in terms of like, it's unprecedented, the amount of like sort of protest that's going on within the context of that country. It's also fascinating in this sort of like this inability for the body politic that is protesting against the anti-democratic moves of Bibi Netanyahu to see the massive anti-democratic sort of like elephant that has been sitting, that is almost the room essentially for decades now.
Yes, and Michael Swad, the Israeli human rights lawyer who came on my Sunday show last week, made that point that we are protesting just a few miles away from people we are controlling and don't have any democracy. And the point I made on MSNBC on Monday night when I was sitting in for Chris Hayes was, if you want to have real democracy in Israel, you need to have freedom for the Palestinians. You can't have a real democracy that controls the lives of several million people who don't have a right to vote, who don't have a right to choose their government, who do live under dictatorship. A prominent Israeli journalist texted me last week saying, I hope you're covering the story. It's crazy what's happening here. We're turning into a dictatorship. I said, yes, I'm glad you're all protesting. But of course, for Palestinians, it's always been a dictatorship.
Right.
And he said, yes, after a pause. So I hope more people are realizing this, probably not enough. What I would say is, look, we can't control Israel. I know that Netanyahu's son believes that the American government is behind all the protests. I love the conspiracy theory. But we can't control what's happening in Israel fully. What we can control is what's happening in our country. And one thing I would say is, for a long time, people have tried, I wrote a book called Win Every Argument. How do you frame the best argument? How do you come up with the best narrative? And I do believe that we've tried so many arguments, those of us who believe in Palestinian rights, who are critics of Israel's occupation, international law, human rights reports, trying to humanize Palestinians. We've tried every single method people have, and it hasn't really worked, not on Congress for sure. But what I would say is, now is the time to lean into the supporters of Israel's argument, because for years we were told by supporters of Israel, the reason we back Israel is not because of military-industrial complex, it's not because we're fighting Iran, it's not because of AIPAC, it's not because of any of those conspiracies, it's because of shared values. Shared values. Okay then, I'm all for that. What shared values do we have with Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, and Benjamin Netanyahu? Please tell me, Democratic senators, please tell me, Democratic members of Congress, because if Democrats are going to say we're facing semi-fascism at home, Marjorie Taylor Greene is outrageous and beyond the pale. I mean, Itamar Ben-Gvir makes Marjorie Taylor Greene look like a communist, lefty, sandal-wearing peacenik. I mean, this is what people in America need to understand now. The Israeli government is so out there. No Democratic official, forget the Republican body, but no Democratic body official who claims to believe in any kind of progressive values. And we've always talked about PEP, Progressive Except Palestine. A lot of very, very liberal politicians in America, that's the blind spot. They're fine with the oppression of the Palestinians. Well, forget the Palestinians for a moment. Look what's happening in Israel proper. And clearly, to be fair, even Joe Biden, best friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, old friend of Netanyahu, came out this week and said, hold on. So the Israeli right is its own worst enemy. And I believe that those who support Palestinian rights and support Israeli democracy in America should be making that point, which is, we are Israel's ally. But on what basis is that alliance? Clearly, it's not shared values right now.
Well, I mean, I'm fearful, though, that framing these protests as pro-democracy protests is not taking the big picture into account. Because, yes, Benjamin Netanyahu is attempting to overhaul the judiciary and politicize it greatly. But beforehand, the judiciary and the Israeli Supreme Court has been instrumental in negating Palestinians' home rights and allowing writ large Israeli settlers to take them, for them to be bulldozed for military.
What I would just say from a narrative point of view is, if you have Israelis arguing for democracy, now you can say, well, that democracy never really existed, certainly not for Palestinians. But it is a moment to say, okay, what kind of democracy? And I think Palestinians who haven't turned up at protests are making that point, that, okay, what kind of democracy is this going to look like once we're done and finished? It can't be what was there before. It can't. And I think there's shades of that here in the US, where we say we're against Trump and we're against the fascism of the GOP and we want democracy in America. And I've been saying for several years, yes, we should be pushing back against the big lie, and we should be pushing back against Republican attempts to gerrymander and set up secretaries of state who are election done. But then we also need to have a wider conversation about American democracy wasn't so great before Trump.
Right.
I mean, the Electoral College needs to go, regardless of whether Donald J. Trump abuses it with fake electors. It just needs to go. So I do think you can use conversations that are going on right now without accepting all the premises, Emma, you're right, but to use it to further a broader agenda. I just think from a narrative point of view, that's a useful thing to do.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And the way I think we see that in, at least in Israel, the way that process starts is maybe adopting a constitution that sort of codifies the idea of equality. And then hopefully
they've resisted doing year after year. The Israeli Knesset does not allow a bill that Palestinian politicians put forward that says this should be a state of all its citizens. That very simple liberal line gets rejected every year. They're not even allowed to debate it.
Well, I guess hope springs eternal, but we'll see. And folks, make sure you pick up Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. Great tips for basically all the information that you hear on shows like Medhi's or ours. The way that you put this to use is by learning the sort of the format and the tactics and just the skills that Medhi lays out and does so well on his program. I can't wait to see that Taibbi episode. Really appreciate you coming on, Medhi. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we'll put a link to Medhi's book at majority.fm and in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Going to take a break and head into the fun half, as it were.
Ah,
Are we going to go into the fun half?
we should.
Yeah, we're going to go into the fun half. Last week we did a Freebie Friday. This week we're doing a fun half.
We were very timely today.
Oh, yeah, we nailed it.
I'm super impressed.
Yep.
12:59 on the dot.
Yep, we nailed it.
Boom.